In these next three videos, we're going to look a little deeper at the three major categories of cameras: the mobile phones, point-and-shoot cameras, and DSLRs. I want you to be able to understand each of the categories so that you can know which one is going to work best for your food photography and how to use each of them to their maximum potential. So first we're going to talk about mobile food photography. We're going to look at the advantages of using your mobile phone to take food photos. We're going to look at the disadvantages of using your mobile phone. We'll talk about some apps that make shooting on your phone so much more efficient. We'll also look at when it's best to use this camera and when it may be better to use a different category. So first, the advantages of mobile food photography. There are some obvious benefits to using your mobile phone. The first is that it's extremely portable and always available. No matter where you are, you have this great quality camera with you, and the quality is actually quite good as long as you have good lighting. It does struggle in low light, but when you have plenty of light in your scene, the camera on your iPhone can work really well. There's also plenty of apps that make shooting and editing your pictures very easy. And finally, it's really built for sharing. There's so many apps and technologies in your phone that make it so easy to share on Instagram and Pinterest and Google Plus and different platforms. So that's another big advantage, that it's all right there on your phone in one contained environment, and that can make things really fast and really efficient. But there's also some disadvantages. You have virtually no control over your camera settings, and like we talked about in the last video, it's really important to be able to control your aperture and your ISO and those elements. It also performs really poorly under low lighting situations. The pictures will be very dark and very grainy. And similarly, the image quality is going to be absolutely nowhere near DSLR levels under any circumstances. If you are going to be using your mobile phone for food photography, there's two apps that I would use to help me take better pictures. Now here, this isn't about editing your pictures and what apps can add filters and all the other things. We'll talk about editing on your mobile phone later down the road. For now, this is just apps that help take better pictures and give you more control. The first is simply Apple's built-in camera app. This is the one you've already probably been using and you're familiar with. On iOS 7, it looks and works really nicely. You can see on the bottom you can just swipe the screen to slide between a photo or a panorama or a square picture or a video. There's built-in filters, which I don't like using, but you just click the three gray circles and you bring up a list of filters that you can use in real time. After you take your pictures on the camera app, you can actually do minor edits in terms of boosting the colors and cropping the pictures and adding filters and post-production. And at the end of the day, it'll help you take a fairly decent quality picture. It's already right there, self-contained on your phone, and it's very easy to use. But Camera Plus is an amazing application. This is my single favorite iPhone app, and it does so much for you. For $1, you unlock basically every feature you would get on a point-and-shoot camera on your iPhone. It's amazing. So if you look at this first picture here, you can see that you can actually separate the focus and the exposure points. So if you wanted to focus, for example, on the sleeve of this coffee cup, but you wanted the exposure to be on the white part so that the image is brighter, you can separate those two elements and just tap on the different parts of the pictures to get two different exposure points. Whereas on the built-in camera app, you can only focus and get the exposure for one single point. You can't separate them like this. You'll also notice that there's an exposure compensation, or the EV slider, on the bottom. This allows you to make your images brighter or darker, and that's a feature you don't usually see until you get to point-and-shoot cameras, and that's really exciting if you want to add a little extra brightness to your image. Again, the cost is that you're going to introduce more noise into your pictures, which we'll talk about in the editing section of this course, but it can make your images look brighter, which is always a challenge on the iPhone. And you'll notice on this gray bar here, it gives you your ISO and your shutter speed. So that's an extremely valuable information that we just talked about that's available right there on your phone. You can't particularly change this directly, but at least it shows you what it is. There's also a setting to lock the white balance, so you can actually adjust the white balance on your phone as you're taking a picture. And those two circles on the left are the features we just talked about, where you can lock your exposure and your focus points as you move around and take the pictures. There's also a built-in editing suite that gives you some basic features like adding weird filters, which I wouldn't use, and cropping and doing a few other things to your pictures. And like we talked about earlier, you can click on any picture and see the ISO and the shutter speed and the focal length and all of the other data that applies to this picture. And it saves all of your pictures in its own light box. This way you don't clutter up your photo albums on your actual phone. You can just look at all the pictures right there on the light box, delete the ones that were bad, and save the good ones back to your camera's original library. So this app is absolutely fantastic, and I mean, for $1, it unlocks tons of functionality that you've got to be using when you're doing food photography. So whenever I take pictures of food with my phone, I'm always using Camera Plus, and I hope you will use it as well. So let's talk about the times and places when it's most appropriate to use a mobile camera. The first is in restaurants or other impromptu scenarios where you're like, hey, I need to take some pictures, so you pull your phone out of your pocket. It's always there, it's very convenient, and it works really well if you don't want to lug around a big camera. It's also best to use it only when your scene has plenty of natural lighting. If you have a poorly lit scene or it's at night and it's kind of dark, you're going to get really bad quality pictures. But if you can set up your scene to have plenty of light, that'll help you get the most out of these types of pictures. And third, when depth of field is not an issue, is a good time to use your mobile phone. Remember, depth of field controls how much of the image is in focus, and on an iPhone, you can't control that very much. Now, in the previous slide, we saw Camera Plus, which allows you to set your focal points in a much more controlled way, and you can get a little bit more control over depth of field than you otherwise could, but still, it's not going to give you DSLR-like controls. And finally, you don't necessarily want to use your iPhone if you're going to be blowing up these pictures and making posters out of them, because the resolution just isn't there. They're going to have a lot of noise, and it's best only if you're going to be sharing them in smaller formats, like on Instagram, where they're maybe 700 pixels wide at most. Anything too big or too high resolution will probably require a higher quality camera. So if you decide that this is a camera you really want to use for food photography, how do you get the most out of it? And here are a few tips that I often use when using my iPhone. First, you want to make sure that your scene is perfectly lit. As we just talked about, your phone is going to falter in low light conditions, so you want to make sure that your scenes have plenty of light to give you the best possible opportunity to take really good pictures with your phone. And it might be no surprise that I recommend you always use Camera Plus to control your exposure, white balance, and focal point. It makes it so much easier and gives you so much more control. Next, if you're really going to use an iPhone, I would suggest using very modern hardware, as in an iPhone 5 or an iPhone 5S. If you're using something like a 3GS or an iPhone 4, those cameras are really, really poor quality compared to the newer ones. So if you want to maximize your results with the camera, make sure you're using more modern technology that has a lot more to offer. And finally, while this isn't specifically for a mobile camera, I think it's probably best to not use your mobile phone as your primary camera, because it's just not going to give you the same level of quality that you'll get from even a point and shoot, and certainly a higher quality DSLR. Now, if you're going to be using an iPhone, your homework for this lesson is first to download Camera Plus if you don't have it already. It's 99 cents, and it adds so much value to your camera. So if you do decide to use your mobile phone for food photographs, get more comfortable with this setup. Create a nice scene and make sure it's really well lit, and do a photo shoot with Camera Plus, and try to maximize your results using that application to take pretty decent quality pictures using the techniques we talked about in this lesson.